2 months. And the DNA that should have cracked this case is a complex mixture that current technology cannot fully decode. The Bitcoin ransom address is sitting there, traced, watched, waited on, but no payment has ever moved through it. And somewhere outside Tucson, in desert terrain so thick and so dark that a person can disappear 20 feet from the road, the answers to this case may be waiting in a place that cameras cannot reach and search teams have barely touched. Day 62. And this investigation is building towards something, even if most people cannot see it yet. I am Mikkel. This is the Mikkel Report. Subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because the details we are about to go through are the ones that actually matter, and they are not being assembled like this anywhere else. Let us start with the desert, because the geography of this case matters enormously, and it has not been given the attention it deserves. News Nation correspondent Brian Enton and producer Allison Weiner went out into the Pima County desert with former SWAT commander Bob Krieger, a man who spent nearly 30 years working those specific terrain zones, including 5 years supervising the border crime unit. What they saw reframes the search question entirely. 45 minutes outside metropolitan Tucson, the terrain becomes something that people who have not stood in it cannot fully imagine, not the kind of desert you picture from movies. Dense brush growing above head height, cacti with arms and thorns and spines covering every surface, hills and trails that look navigable from a road and become impenetrable 30 feet in, a road that runs south toward Mexico for 100 miles, the same road historically used for human smuggling, drug trafficking, and according to Krieger's direct experience, body disposals. Krieger's assessment was unambiguous. Bodies have been found in those specific zones multiple times. The terrain makes it genuinely impossible to search without precise knowledge of where you are looking. You can walk 20 feet from a road, crouch down, and be completely invisible to anyone passing. A person in black clothing can disappear from view at that distance in daylight. At night, without moon cover, that distance shrinks to almost nothing. What made the desert theory interesting was also what ultimately undercut it as the primary search focus. The practical reality, as Krieger explained it, is that without specific intelligence pointing to a particular location, you cannot search desert terrain of that scope in any systematic way. It is not like searching a neighborhood or a defined area. It is hundreds of square miles of hostile terrain with thousands of possible concealment points, and you would need to know something to narrow it down. The search conducted in the first days around Nancy Guthrie's neighborhood was the only realistically executable search, given what investigators had at the time. Whether that search was conducted with sufficient urgency and expertise in those first hours is a different and more troubling question, one that sources close to the investigation have answered in ways that are deeply uncomfortable. But here is what the desert geography tells us about the broader case. Whoever took Nancy Guthrie had access to terrain where a person can vanish completely, 45 minutes from downtown Tucson, half a mile from a main road, and in a jurisdiction where violent crime against vulnerable people in these zones is not unprecedented. Now let us talk about the DNA, because this is where the resolution of this case most likely lives, and the picture is significantly more complicated than most coverage has acknowledged. Forensic genetic genealogist CeCe Moore, who has helped solve more than 300 cases, and whose work was instrumental in identifying Brian Koberger in the Idaho murders, sat down specifically to address the DNA situation in the Nancy Guthrie investigation. Her assessment was the most technically precise public account of this evidence dimension to date, and it deserves to be understood carefully. The challenge, as Moore described it, is not the absence of DNA. It is the nature of what was collected. The sample or samples recovered from Nancy Guthrie's home appear to be complex mixtures, meaning biological material from more than 2 individuals is present in the same sample. That is a fundamentally different analytical problem than a simple mixture containing one unknown person's DNA alongside the victim's. Here is why that matters. Genetic genealogy does not use the same DNA profile type that law enforcement has been working with for decades. The traditional STR profile, short tandem repeats, is what gets uploaded to CODIS, the national database law enforcement uses. Genetic genealogy uses what is called a SNP profile, single nucleotide polymorphisms, which contains hundreds of thousands of genetic markers across the entire genome. The deconvolution methods for separating individual profiles from complex mixtures in a SNP context are substantially less developed than the equivalent process for traditional STR profiles. Moore's explanation: if the unknown perpetrator's DNA contributes 40% or more of the material in a mixture, current science can likely work with it. If the contribution is 20% or lower, or if there are 3 or 4 unknown individuals all contributing at low percentages, the technology to cleanly extract a usable profile may not yet exist. The sheriff's public statement that it could take a year referred to this exact problem, not a failure of effort or attention, a genuine technological frontier. The science needed to deconvolute this specific type of complex mixture at the level required for genetic genealogy is being fast-tracked, according to Moore, with this case and others like it driving the urgency. She specifically referenced a bioinformatics software package from a company called Estra that is reportedly being developed to address exactly this kind of mixture analysis, and that the timeline for its completion may have been accelerated because of the public attention on the Guthrie case. The bottom line from Moore: if a viable SNP profile is extracted from that mixture, this case gets solved. Not maybe, definitively, within weeks, because the FBI's genetic genealogy team is ready, the databases are available, and the analytical process, once a clean profile exists, is well established and fast. The obstacle is not the investigative will, it is the state of a specific branch of forensic science in April of 2026. There is a second DNA dimension that has not received enough public attention, and it comes from an unexpected source. CeCe Moore raised the case of Chris Bogosian, an 85-year-old grandfather in Australia who was kidnapped in February 2026, the exact same month as Nancy Guthrie, by armed, masked individuals who came in the night. He was taken from his home. He was held at a location. Neighbors heard screaming and did nothing. When investigators found where he had been held, Bogosian himself was gone, but his blood was at that location, and wherever the perpetrators had kept him, their DNA was there too. Bogosian was eventually found deceased. It was believed to be a case of mistaken identity. Moore's point in raising this case was not morbid, it was forensic. She said it plainly. Wherever Nancy Guthrie was taken, wherever she was held, that location is a second crime scene. A second crime scene means a second opportunity to collect the perpetrator's DNA, independent of whatever was or was not successfully extracted from the primary scene at her home. This is not a theoretical possibility. It is an investigative certainty. Nancy Guthrie went somewhere. She was transported in a vehicle. She was held in a space. Every surface she contacted deposited her biological material, and everywhere her captors were, they deposited theirs: hair, skin cells, touch DNA on every surface they handled, saliva on every object they put near their mouths. The Byte flashlight visible in the Nest camera footage handled near or in the suspect's mouth during those 40 or more minutes at the property is a specific DNA opportunity that Moore flagged directly. The moment that device left his mouth and he touched anything, his DNA was on the exterior of his own glove. And that glove made contact with surfaces inside that house, surfaces that may not have been swabbed, surfaces that the investigation has potentially not yet fully processed. Moore's recommendation: go back. Re-swab. Look for rootless hair. Look for touch DNA on surfaces that were not prioritized in the initial sweep. The science to extract usable material from smaller and smaller samples has advanced dramatically, and what was not viable 8 months ago may be viable today. The DNA is still there. It just needs to be found. The Bitcoin ransom thread is alive and being actively worked, and it represents one of the more technically sophisticated investigative avenues in this case. Ari Redbord, the global head of policy and government affairs at TRM Labs, a blockchain intelligence company, and a former assistant U.S. attorney who specialized in terrorism and financial intelligence, explained the mechanics clearly. Every Bitcoin transaction occurs on a public blockchain. Every transaction is permanent. Every transaction is traceable. The Bitcoin address that appeared in the ransom note is sitting there, visible, watched, recorded in every direction. The FBI's Virtual Asset Unit, a specialized team of cryptocurrency tracers who have cracked ransomware operations, North Korean financial networks, and terrorist financing cases, has that address and is monitoring it. The challenge, as Redbord explained, is that the most actionable moment in a Bitcoin tracing case is when funds move and eventually cash out at a cryptocurrency exchange, because exchanges require identity verification. When funds hit an exchange, investigators subpoena the exchange for the underlying account holder's information: name, address, identification, the email used to create the account. That email leads to a phone number. That phone number leads to cell tower records. That is when the digital threads converge into a person. No payment appears to have been made through that Bitcoin address, which means the cash out moment, the moment of maximum traceable exposure, has not yet occurred. But the address exists. The FBI has it. The tracers are watching it. And if anyone attempts to move funds through that wallet at any point in the future, the virtual asset unit will know in real time. Former prosecutor Nancy Grace made a point that is worth holding. CeCe Guthrie confirmed publicly that she believes 2 of the ransom notes were genuine. She responded to them. She said clearly, "We will pay." The family's willingness was communicated. If the ransom was real and the perpetrators received that communication and never followed up with proof of life, that tells us something about either what happened to Nancy or what kind of people did this. Criminologists analyzing the pattern have noted the unusual structure of the ransom approach: a delay between the abduction and the first demand, communications routed through media outlets rather than directly to the family, and a failure to ever provide proof of life. Each of those departures from standard ransom protocol is a data point, and together they suggest either extreme inexperience with the mechanics of kidnapping for ransom or a situation that changed in ways the perpetrators had not planned for. The Google Nest camera is not finished giving up its secrets. That is one of the most significant developments in this case right now, and it is being discussed without the weight it deserves. Nancy Grace reported, citing sourcing on this point, that investigators believe there are additional Google images beyond what has already been publicly released. The first image, the figure on the porch, the casing visit on or around January 11th, was recovered despite the fact that Nancy Guthrie did not have an active subscription to the Google Nest camera service. The device was essentially disabled, and yet Google's data infrastructure across its vast server architecture retained imagery that investigators were able to extract. The implication is significant. If Google's systems retained imagery from the camera during periods when the device was not actively recording to a subscription, there may be additional images from additional dates. Images corresponding to the January 24th visit investigators have been asking about, images from dates in December when the Google property searches were occurring, images that might show the suspect in better lighting, at a different angle, or with an identifiable detail that the January footage did not capture. The work of resurrecting that imagery, working with Google's technical teams, navigating the data architecture, writing and serving the necessary legal process is ongoing. It is painstaking, but the possibility that Google's servers contain additional visual evidence of this suspect across multiple visits to Nancy Guthrie's home over a period of weeks is one of the most potentially consequential open threads in this investigation. Forensic professor Joe Scott Morgan made an observation that connects to this directly. When the suspect walked up to that front entrance on the recorded footage, the area he moved through is broken down by the existing architecture into visible grids. If the scene had been locked down from the moment investigators arrived, if no one had walked through that space before forensic documentation was complete, electrostatic imaging could have been applied to exactly the areas where that suspect placed his feet. The footprint impressions, invisible to the naked eye but scientifically recoverable, could have been lifted and compared against any shoes eventually recovered from a suspect. That opportunity is gone. The scene was released, people walked through it, the grids that could have been a forensic gold mine became evidence of what was lost, but the Google server data is different. That does not degrade. That does not get walked through. It sits in infrastructure waiting to be retrieved, and the FBI is working to retrieve it. Here is something that has been largely absent from the coverage of this case: what CeCe Guthrie's 2 siblings are carrying, and what this investigation is doing to a family that is not just one person sitting in front of a camera. Cameron Guthrie, CeCe's brother, described by multiple accounts as someone shaped by military intelligence work and the analytical discipline that comes with it, stated plainly in the family's public conversations that CeCe's professional profile likely made their mother a target. Not said with cruelty, said with the precision of someone trained to assess situations without softening inconvenient conclusions. His sister is a nationally recognized television personality. The assumption that her family has money, that her mother living alone in Tucson was a person worth taking in exchange for a ransom. That assumption would not require sophisticated research to reach. It would only require someone paying attention. Annie Guthrie, who lives just a few miles from Nancy's home in Tucson, who was there first, who called her sister in panic from a house whose interior looked completely normal, even as the blood on the front steps told a different story, has been largely private throughout this ordeal. She has not spoken publicly in depth. She is the one who is calling hospitals, the one who is standing in her mother's clean, orderly home at 11 in the morning, not fully understanding what she was looking at. The one whose life in Tucson is now permanently overlaid with the knowledge of what happened 4 miles from her front door. Mental health professionals who have spoken about the Guthrie case describe the specific psychological weight that falls on the people who were closest to the missing person geographically, ones who were there, who were supposed to be nearby, who feel in some unearned and irrational way responsible for not having prevented something they had no reason to anticipate. That weight does not lift with time. It compounds, and it does not get discussed on camera. Savannah is the visible face of this family's pain. But there are 3 children of Nancy Guthrie, and all 3 of them are living inside the same unanswered question every single day. 2 months in, no public arrest, no named suspect, a complex DNA mixture that current technology is working to decode, a Bitcoin address that has not moved, digital evidence threads that are painstaking and slow by legal necessity, an investigation that was compromised in its first hours by decisions made at a leadership level that experienced investigators have described as structurally indefensible. And yet, this case is not cold. It is not over. And the evidence for why it will eventually break is not wishful thinking. It is grounded in the specific technical realities of what investigators have and what they are working with. CeCe Moore said it as directly as anyone has. If they get a viable SMP profile, one clean unknown contributor extracted from that complex mixture, this case gets solved within weeks. The FBI genetic genealogy team is ready to move the moment that profile exists. The databases can be searched. If necessary, warrants can be served on the major commercial DNA companies whose 50 million profiles dwarf the 2 million in the publicly available databases. The identification at that point is not a question of if, it is a question of when. Retired FBI agent Jason Gishin said it in the context of digital evidence, the December Google searches, the cell tower data, the legal process grinding forward one subpoena at a time. Cases like this do not break because of one dramatic breakthrough. They break because a chain of small digital connections eventually closes into a loop around a person who thought they had disappeared. And former SWAT commander Bob Krieger, who has stood in the terrain where bodies have been found before, and who knows what that desert is capable of hiding, said something that captures the situation honestly. The second crime scene is out there. Wherever Nancy Guthrie was taken, wherever she was held, whatever vehicle transported her, those locations contain biological trace that does not expire when investigators find them. And in cases like this, second crime scenes are found. The physical evidence will have been waiting. The person who took Nancy Guthrie is not past this. Every day is borrowed time. Every new technological development in forensic genealogy narrows the gap. Every subpoena returned, every cell tower record processed, every Google server query answered is one step closer to the moment when the loop closes. There is a sign outside KVOA, the local television station in Tucson where Savannah Guthrie once worked before she became a national figure, that reads, "Bring her home." Thousands of signatures, messages from people in Tucson and Phoenix and Fernandina Beach, Florida, and places far beyond Arizona. Notes that say things like, "Mostly what God does is love us," and "The desert is calling for Nancy Guthrie's safe return." And each arm of this symbol represents one of your loving children who wants you home. The fourth arm is the entire Tucson community praying for you. That banner is not investigative evidence. It does not crack DNA mixtures or trace Bitcoin wallets or deconvolute complex genetic profiles, but it represents something that matters in a case like this in a very specific way. It keeps the pressure on, it keeps the name in front of the country, it keeps the reward visible and the tip line open and the possibility alive in the mind of every person who might be sitting on the piece of information that changes everything. 62 days. And the people working this case, not the leadership whose decisions in the first hours cost evidence that can never be recovered, but the investigators in the field, the forensic scientists in the laboratory, the digital forensic specialists working through tower dumps one record at a time, have not stopped. CeCe Moore believes this case will be solved. She has said it publicly and specifically and with the credibility of someone who has solved 300 others. She just needs the science to catch up to the evidence. The FBI Virtual Asset Unit has the Bitcoin address. They are watching. the Google server team is working to resurrect imagery from dates that may not have been publicly discussed yet. The cell tower data from January 11th, January 24th, and February 1st is being processed. The contractor interviews are ongoing. The DNA is still being worked. And somewhere in this country, the person or people who staged a back gate with Nancy Guthrie's own flower pots, who waited inside her home for her to return, who walked her out the front door in the dark, are living with 62 days of this, carrying it, and knowing that carrying it does not make it disappear. The FBI tip line is 1-800-CL-FBI, anonymous. No arrest required, no conviction required, over $1 million. One call, that is all it takes to be the person who gives this family back something they have not had since February 1st, the ability to stop wondering and start knowing. Nancy Guthrie deserves to come home. Her children deserve an answer. And the person responsible deserves to stand in a courtroom and face exactly what they have done. We are not finished with this case. We will not be finished until there are answers. If this video gave you something, share it right now. One share might reach the person holding the piece of this that makes the loop close. Like this video. And if the Meckel Report is new to you, this is what we do here. We go deeper. We stay longer. We do not let this go quiet. I am Meckel. This is the Meckel Report. Thank you for watching.